You are listening to the Centropic Oracle, an audiobook podcast of science fiction and fantasy short stories that make you think and feel. For More Time with You by C.B. Droege. The sky glowed with the light from the moon, making it easier for Harold to pick his way across the rocky surface of the barren landscape. He shifted his burden up higher onto his shoulder and glanced back, looking for his competition. Most of them must have been left far behind by now. That rock slide worked in his favor after all. He turned his attention back to his own feet. He needed to keep up this pace and watch his step. He was in the lead, but a twisted ankle now could still lose this all for him, and for her. He jogged around a boulder, and his goal was before him. It sat directly in the center of a deep caldera, the floating sanctuary. Easily visible from here, yet it was still about a kilometer away. He picked his way quickly but carefully across the rocks. It didn't look much like the stories. From the descriptions he'd heard his whole life leading up to this contest, he had visualized a grand cathedral hovering high above the ground, bobbing slightly, and with a pale glow. The reality was less grand. The building was more like an open-sided forum. 6 tall, white marble pillars on a stone slab suspended a peaked roof covered in reddish tiles. Not much to look at, really. It was suspended not by glowing magics, but by thick metal cables lashed to the edges of the caldera, extending from the 6 corners of the structure. One of those cables was mounted directly before Harold. He made his way towards it. Even from here, he could see the tiny steel filaments in the braiding of the cable as they glinted in the moonlight. Harold could not see the current occupants of the floating sanctuary, but he knew they must be down there somewhere. The ground shook underneath, and he nearly lost his footing. Wisps of smoke rose from the floor of the basin. Time is running out. The jostling loosened the cloth from the top of the bundle he carried, revealing his daughter's lifeless face. "We're almost there, Princess," he said to her pale features as he pulled the cloth back down. He glanced over his shoulder to see if anyone was coming up from behind him, but the bright rocks were clear of forms and shadows. It won't be long now. The end of the cable was surrounded by a massive sleeve embedded into the rocks. The cable itself was as big around as his waist and was flattened along the top side. He took one tentative step out, then another. Crossing was arduous and nerve-wracking, especially with his daughter in his arms, but not the most difficult of the obstacles he had faced today. Not by far. He was almost across when the land shook again, and the cable swayed slightly with the power of it. He slipped off the path with one foot and threw out one hand for balance, barely keeping hold of his cargo with the other. Someone behind him screamed. He couldn't help but glance back. One of the other racers had made it out onto the cable without him noticing. The woman, her own bundle strapped across her back, pinwheeled her arms frantically, but the sway was just too much out near the middle of the cable. She went tumbling down, screaming again, and was soon hidden from him by a bright white plume of smoke. When the shaking subsided, he centered himself with a deep breath and finished the last 10 steps with some speed. He had done it. He had made it to the floating sanctuary first. He wasn't sure what was supposed to come next, but he wasn't expecting to be met with sobbing. There should be some kind of ceremony. A wizened old man should come forth with the spells of life, presenting them to him in his daughter's name. A team of officials in uniform should congratulate him on his success. But there was no old man. There were no officials. There were no congratulations. Instead, in the middle of the stone floor, a woman knelt next to a small boy, hugging him fiercely and sobbing into his hair. Harold took a few steps closer and set his daughter down upon the stone, her wrappings coming undone again as they shifted in the rising wind. It didn't matter now. They were here. The woman opened her eyes and noticed Harold for the first time. She scrunched her face up and pulled the boy even closer. "No!" she yelled over the wind and grinding earth around them. "It's too soon. It's not time yet." The boy pushed himself a bit away from the woman and turned to look at Harold and his daughter. The boy did not look as sad as the woman, nor so fierce. "I came through the mountains," Harold said, not knowing what he was supposed to be saying. "I followed the instructions and I won the contest. I'm here now in the floating sanctuary at last. Give me what is due." The boy was about 10 years old, but had the stoic expression of one much older. He frowned briefly in thought and turned to the woman. "He's right, Mother." The woman tried to speak, but only moaned. "We've known this was coming for a long time," the boy said evenly. "Remember how hard it was for us in the beginning? We should try not to make it hard for them now." He turned to Harold then. "You're right. It's time." Harold watched, unmoving, as the boy walked the short distance between them. His mother, still sobbing, sat back onto her heels, as if defeated. Her straw-colored hair fell in front of her face, blocking her scrunched-up eyes from sight. The boy reached up under his collar and drew out a glowing crystal on a silvery chain. Harold's prize. The boy hesitated for just a moment, then quickly drew the chain over his head, as if he knew it was something which must be done quickly. He held out the crystal in a shaking hand. For a moment, Harold just stared, amazed. This wasn't right. No one had told him that he would have to actually take the crystal from last year's winner. This was too much. As Harold watched, the boy began to falter. He swayed a bit on his feet, his eyelids fluttered, and his skin turned from pale to gray at an unnatural rate. Harold reached out and grabbed the crystal just as the boy's knees failed and he collapsed to the stone floor. Beyond his crumpled form, the mother wailed again, but the boy was unmoving. Harold resolved that he would be stronger than this woman when the time came. For now, he placed the silvery chain around his daughter's lifeless neck and pulled her toward him, waiting for heat to return to her body. We hope you enjoyed For More Time With You by C.B. Droege, read by Larissa Thompson. If you'd like to learn more about the author and narrator of this story, or make a donation to them, follow the story page link in the description. Pledge your support to us on Patreon for cool rewards and to help us bring you more stories. If you would like to submit a story for consideration or apply to be a narrator, a link to our submission guidelines is in the description.